I'm Charles McIntyre, the chairman and co-founder of EdTechX and IBIS Capital. I'm here today with my friend, colleague and other co-founder, Benjamin Vedrenne-Cloquet.
Hello everyone and welcome to the EdTechX Summit.
Welcome to EdTechX's Global Summit, and a big thank you to all those involved in bringing this online event to life. An ecosystem depends on the continued healthy coexistence of its constituent parts, and so it's been humbling to see the support and effort that has gone into delivering this world-class conference that brings together people from all over the globe who have an interest in sharing ideas and experiences to help address the incredible challenges we all face. To that end, please note the Twitter hashtags and handles so that you can connect to each other after the event. As you all know from previous events, Benjamin and I seek to provide an opening warm-up session which aims to share some of the key insights that we have acquired on our various EdTech adventures. I feel today that we're on a digital rollercoaster ride where we need to hold on tight and focus very carefully to ensure we emerge safely at the other end. Education and training were already on a journey of change when COVID-19 hit, and now we're faced with having to respond by pressing the Go Fast button just as we were getting started. So, here we go. Let me start with explaining a little of what we have been up to. An important element of building the ecosystem has been about joining the dots across the globe. So we have been running EdTech events in 15 cities in different corners of the world, and now have brought this all together under one roof with this inaugural Global Online Summit. All in all, connecting 20,000 people with an interest in education and training. In addition to this network, we have then provided insight into key trends, projections, and predictions that are occurring across the sector. I'm pleased to say that we have just released our latest 90-page global report, which this year has a particular focus on the world of education and training as we emerge from COVID-19. The report has been prepared in partnership with our good friends, Cairneagle Associates, who are leading international strategy consultants focused on the education sector. They have been invaluable in contributing their detailed knowledge of the workings of the sector to this report. And then there is our own track record, where in recent months we've had to battle against hurricane force headwinds. 18 months ago, as some of you may know, we launched the world's first NASDAQ Special Purpose Acquisition Company, or SPAC, focused on education and training. We were 2 times oversubscribed at IPO, so it was a great start. Then, in December last year, we finally reached a deal with the #1 adult English language training company, both online and offline, in China called Metin. However, at this stage, we didn't know what was coming around the corner. So at the end of February, we were trying to see investors around the world just as the world was starting to close down. Often we were doing Zoom calls from New York hotel rooms to investors who were just a couple of blocks away. Anyway, we managed to get it done by the end of March and create Metin EdTechX. Our first day of trading was exciting because we saw our first unicorn as the valuation traded through the $1 billion barrier. A great moment in one of the worst storms the public markets has witnessed. Well, we like challenges, so much so that we are going to launch another NASDAQ SPAC focused on education and training. We remain confident about the future of this sector and feel with our global reach, insight, and track record, we are well positioned to navigate through these choppy waters. Benjamin is now going to explain some of the macro drivers impacting the new landscape post-COVID-19.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you all for joining us today. So COVID-19, the great disruptor of education and work. Before we dive into the impact of COVID-19 on our industry, what are we dealing with here? Is it unprecedented or is it déjà vu? Well, in my view, we are dealing with something pretty unique, what I call the Cerberus-like crisis. A crisis with 3 heads, a health crisis, an economic crisis, and a psychological crisis. On the health front, history tells us few things. First, it has happened before and killed anything between 12 million to 200 million people. It also lasts more than just few months, anything between 2 years and in the case of smallpox, up to 400 years. Optimists will say that we are much better equipped now to deal with a pandemic than in the 15th century. But pessimists will say our open, borderless, fluid societies and economies are actually paradise-like, dreamlike condition for a virus of this kind. On the economic front, if we just compare where we are today versus last year, we have already hit unprecedented milestones. Just taking US data as a marker, employment reached 15%, interest rates are at zero, oil crashed 70%, PMI index is at 37%, stock volatility 3x, and we are facing unprecedented quantitative easing. Economic experts are saying that the magnitude of this crisis is similar to the 1930s Great Depression. But at the same time, they also say that we are dealing with a very, very different animal. So in short, no one really knows. What this crisis is telling us as well is that we are entering a new economic order. For centuries, a characteristic of dominant economies has been the ability to export their own crisis to the rest of the world and often come out stronger. This was the case of the last financial crisis emerging from the US. We then had a US-China trade war, marking a new balance of powers between the two economies. And today, for the first time, we are seeing a global economic crisis triggered by China alone. This perhaps signals a new era of global economic leadership from China. Interestingly, what you can see here is that China is expected to be the only economic region who will not experience GDP reduction as a result of COVID-19. On the psychological front, this is also an unprecedented crisis. Human daily activity has been pretty much put to stop. 81% of the global workforce is currently locked down. Add to this strict social distancing plus the threat of an invisible enemy, all this generates high level of anxiety and stress among population. Actually, experts predict a second blow of mental health issues, burnout, and stress conditions affecting the workforce post-COVID crisis. So it looks like we've hit the worst of times. But as often, there is another side to the coin. As Charles Dickens wrote in A Tale of Two Cities, this was the best of all times. This was the worst of all times. And one of the very few positives of the COVID crisis is actually the creation of the perfect conditions for a great digital leap for education and work. So the great digital leap for education and work. Let's focus now on education. We are all familiar with this, the technology adoption life cycle. Pre-COVID, EdTech was still very much a thing for innovators and early adopters. But COVID-19 had just got EdTech into mainstream, fast-tracking in our view 5 to 10 years of digital adoption. As the press article from Bloomberg put it, this could be the biggest sustained mass experiment in online education since the internet was founded in the 80s. So let's see what happened pretty much everywhere in the world. And let's see as well how China handled the situation. What we've seen is suddenly a massive demand shock with 1.5 billion students affected by schools closures, and most schools scrambling to implement EdTech solutions. Obviously, the consequence is usage of EdTech solution is up, significantly up, plus 400% for Google Classroom, plus 60% for Byju's and Duolingo. So everyone thinks that's great. EdTech has come to an age. The challenge, though, is that most of this growth is driven by non-paid adoption. And I may make here a cynical comment. While it is great to have EdTech companies reacting cohesively and generously to the crisis by providing their solutions for free, they may have missed the opportunity to prove they can monetize at scale. The question now is how sticky this adoption will be. Our view is that it will vary depending on products, but overall, our models show that all product segments will be net winners versus pre-COVID. Let's talk about China now. What's interesting about China is that they immediately saw how the COVID crisis could be a potential disruption to education. And so they treated this aspect as a national emergency. They have reacted very early on by creating a national task force called the National Online Cloud Classroom and instructed the large telcos and internet providers to provide bandwidth capacity for up to 50 million students simultaneously. And this across a selection of curated EdTech apps and software solutions. They've also organized live broadcast classrooms on national TV to reach Chinese rural areas deprived from 4G. So if there is one country where EdTech has gone mass market in no time and in a very efficient manner, it is China. And what you can see here is that all education stock in China with a digital delivery component, the TALS, the New Oriental, the Koolearn, the GSX, have all gone up by at least 25% in price during the COVID crisis. Let's talk about the great digital leap in the workplace now. At work, the rise of Zoom is obviously the tip of the iceberg of digital adoption. Zoom had secured its place in history by being the fastest digital service ever to reach 200 million users. It took Zoom 3 months to gain 200 million users. That's 6 times quicker than Fortnite and Instagram. Collaboration platforms like Microsoft Teams and Slack are also experiencing dramatic growth. But the disruption in the workplace as a result of COVID-19 will be much deeper than the simple mass usage of video conferencing and collaboration apps. COVID-19 is actually about to make the future of work the new normal. Change in the way we work as a result of COVID-19 will not only be driven by employers, but also and mostly by consumers. We will prefer to avoid human interaction and so encourage more automation. Post-lockdown, we see a next normal for the workforce made of 4 categories. Category number 1, virtual remote. Some employees will never go back to their workplace. For those, focus will be on remote support, productivity, connectivity. On-site flexible. Some employees will be organized into a mix of digital and on-site shifts. On-site critical. Some employees will have to learn to operate in staggered shifts. And then other. This other category may represent a large portion of middle management in companies. We anticipate here large-scale layoffs, but also an opportunity for large-scale retraining, upskilling, or learning sabbatical. So what does it mean in simple terms? It means more technology, more automation, and more demand for reskilling. And these are very, very favorable drivers for the future of work and its ecosystem. So yes, great digital leap for both education and the future of work. So in a way, it is the worst of all times, but it's also the best of all times for education and work. And Charles is going to dig a bit deeper into this.
In a world of accelerated disruption, we are keen to see how this shakes out across education and training. We have a number of moving parts at play: the immediate impact of COVID-19, and then the longer-term structural impacts. For example, we have seen right across both the business and education sectors a headlong rush to online video to replace face-to-face contact. But this is only part of the short-term cycle. The longer-term structural change will result from the consequential impact on behavior and willingness to adopt digital solutions. Solutions that will aim to enhance rather than replicate face-to-face learning and experience. Video attempts to substitute classroom broadcasting, but this is with less engagement and empathy. Online classroom tools that add levels of intelligence through adaptive learning, bespoke content, and engagement are the long-term positive contributions to learning efficacy. So if we set this out on a graph, where we have across the horizontal axis the short-term impact or cycle gain versus pain, and then on the vertical axis, structural pain versus gain, we can map out some of the winners and losers through this period of disruption. Top right, we have the strongest tailwinds for learning technology, while in the opposite corner, we have international learning, where immersive educational training that requires travel being heavily affected. Here are a range of subsectors that are being impacted, some positively, some negatively. Putting out a few examples, we see obvious winners like the OPM or online program management players, such as FutureLearn, who gained over 1 million new members in March alone. Then we have more complicated scenarios, such as healthcare, where COVID-19 has created a mass short-term acceleration, but structurally, healthcare systems need to change for the long term, and they have a poor track record. Here in the UK, we sometimes joke that the NHS has more pilots than British Airways. The reason being that new ideas are frequently tested but rarely implemented. The challenge for digital healthcare is to ensure long-term transition. The point is that in the upcoming recessionary environment, resources will be scarce, budgets will be trimmed, investors increasingly cautious, and access to cash will be key. So those with the ability to take advantage of structural change and tell their story will benefit. So AI being an example. There are those in the short term who will suffer, like job boards, but in the longer term, the improved market efficiency they provide will mean that they will rebound. The ones we have to be worried about are those below this line. Student mobility, for example, will, in our view, be structurally impacted for the long term. The high costs of immersive education, when combined with long-distance travel, will be under threat as people adjust to digital solutions. The challenge for the providers is how to provide a cost-efficient digital alternative that doesn't cannibalize their existing operations. People will still want human engagement and experiences, but Chinese students, as an example, will be increasingly looking at what can be brought to him or her rather than having to travel thousands of miles for the experience. All of these pain or gain stories are linked to the underlying macroeconomic factors created by COVID-19. So, like Benjamin's three-headed Cerberus, we have three nasty, snarling monsters to contend with. A recession resulting in the loss of an estimated $4 trillion to the global economy this year alone. Unemployment climbing and to levels we've never seen before, and the weight of soaring public debt. After the last financial crisis, which was a small pimple compared to the contraction we're experiencing currently, most advanced economies elected to cut spending to help repay the debt, which will mean prolonged agony for all of us as economies try to recover under the repayment programs that are set out. As they say, act in haste and repent at leisure. But sadly, we can't wait, and so the levers we need are focused investment to accelerate technological advancement and deliver improved productivity. The Faustian bargain of the capitalist world is that we borrow today on the basis we can repay out of tomorrow's growth. If we don't have fundamental growth, the system breaks down. So reshaping our world to create real 21st century skills and growth is vital for the next stage of our story. One key aspect in education is the role of the student as consumer and their impact on demand and supply. Average global GDP per capita, inflation adjusted, has almost doubled since the 1990s. As people have become richer, increasing numbers have elected to invest into education. So as the bell curve moves each decade further to the right, the propensity to increase the share of household income spent on education has gone up. The COVID-19 challenge is the dramatic economic impact on household incomes, which have been dragged back and so reducing the share of available income for consumer spend on education. This will obviously vary considerably between different regions. So, for example, households provide about 1/4 of education expenditure in Vietnam, 1/3 in Côte d'Ivoire, half in Nepal, and more than half in Uganda. Whilst in high-income countries, the spend is less than 5% of household income. The challenge now is how to enable affected households to still benefit from improved education despite reduced economic circumstances. This is where the supply side of education technology has a big role to play by providing greater reach through distance learning, improved efficacy, and lower costs. This is particularly relevant for Asia and Africa, who will deliver over the next decade the vast majority of new entrants into the education system, approximately 85%. Making EdTech work effectively will have a vast impact on the world's youth in the future. But to make this all happen, we need investment. Over the last decade, EdTech funding has increased tenfold and stood at over $5.4 billion in 2019, of which more than 50% of that went to Asian companies. However, this is only a small fraction of the 1.5 trillion uninvested private equity capital in the world today, the so-called dry powder. But as we've always said, this is a long rising tide, with a market for EdTech and education as a whole continuing to grow. To provide context, the education market is 3 times the size of the global media and entertainment market, and EdTech is the fastest growing segment, resulting in expansion of over 2.5 times over the next 5 years. So there is definitely a long rising tide for the world of EdTech.
Well, thank you, Charles. And just final few words on our long-term view on digital transition. One thing we know is that when digital goes mainstream, experiential and live become premium. That's what we call the next normal post-digital transition. This is true in media, music, and entertainment. Take the example, for example, here of esports, They are fully digital experience, but yet organize live gathering of fans in stadiums as a premium product. This is the same in the music industry, where live has become a premium product because digital music has become an all-you-can-listen commodity. This is also true with e-commerce, where physical retail has to reinvent itself as a premium experience. Education and work are no exception here. When remote workers are surveyed about the number one challenge of working in a virtual environment, 40% of them mention loneliness and missing interactions with colleagues. And that's what COVID and social distancing are telling us. That we have entered the next normal, where most human-to-human physical and experiential activities are rarefying, and so becoming scarce, and so premium. This may be the sign of a much greater disruption. This may be the sign that 2020 is actually the year when digital capitalism has truly gone mainstream. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of our virtual EdTechX Summit.